Britain has called for restraint amid escalating violence in Hong Kong after a teenage protester was shot in the chest by a police officer and left in a critical condition. The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab condemned the use of live ammunition as disproportionate. It's the worst violence in the last 4 months of protests against China, which is today celebrating 70 years of communist rule. So how did it all start? In 1997, Hong Kong, which had been governed by Britain, was handed back to China, but on the condition that Hong Kong would retain some self-government, independent courts and its own flag, the so-called one country, two systems rule. But this year, protests were sparked over a proposed law making it easier to extradite suspects from Hong Kong to China. Demonstrators fear that Beijing is trying to re-establish control over the peninsula and bring it under Chinese authority. Today, China has celebrated the 70th anniversary of communist rule with a huge display of military might. We'll hear from John Sudworth in Beijing in a moment, but first let's go to Hong Kong and Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, who's there for us now. So Rupert, it's quiet there now, but the protesters show no sign of backing down.
They certainly don't, Fiona. Today, as you said in your introduction, was supposed to be all about the big celebration up there in Beijing, China's 70th birthday party. But many people here in Hong Kong were determined to come out and spoil Beijing's big party. They had been told by the government here not to go out on the streets, that all protests would be banned, but that didn't stop them, and they came out in their tens of thousands. And many of the more radical protesters appeared determined from the outset to take on the police. It has been a very violent day here in Hong Kong. Police say 180 people have been arrested today, the largest number of any one day in this 4 months of protests. And they say also that they used 6 live rounds in the protests, and for the first time one of those rounds was fired directly at one of the protesters. Viewers might find some of the images in my report disturbing.
This was Hong Kong's birthday present to China. They had been told to stay home, that any protest today would be illegal. Any hope the protests would pass peacefully were quickly dashed. This was central Hong Kong this afternoon. And this, the town of Tsuen Wan. Police and protesters fighting running street battles. In the middle of one such battle, this happened. As a young protester tries to strike a policeman with a metal bar, the officer shoots at almost point-blank range. The 18-year-old protester is expected to survive. But news of his shooting only increased the fury on the streets.
We weren't afraid, because they sure will get angrier and angrier. We weren't afraid of that. We have to, especially us, we have to stay in the front line to protect our people, to save Hong Kong, the future of Hong Kong.
As night fell, the streets of Hong Kong began to burn. The protesters began targeting Chinese state-owned banks with Molotov cocktails. But as police reinforcements arrived, the protesters decided it was time to retreat.
So this is the middle of Causeway Bay on Hong Kong Island, and you can see, here come the riot police, here come the water cannon. They're about to start clearing this street. This is only one of at least 6 different protests that's taking place here.
With the water cannons speeding after them and the riot police close behind, the protesters fled into the back streets. And so began a game of cat and mouse. On a street corner, we found this group of angry local residents cursing the police. Up above, they had a suspected protester cornered. As the police marched him away, the crowd screamed at them, "Gangsters, we curse your whole family." This is how deep the divisions have now become here. This is now the new normal. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Hong Kong.
It was a display of military might and the very thing Hong Kong's protesters are railing against: unchallenged political power. China's 70-year economic rise presented as a Communist Party victory in Communist Party style. The president looking on as the adoring crowds carried his portrait. No force can stop the Chinese people, he said. But while China's economic boom has been extraordinary, communist rule has also brought chaos, famine.
Huge fences all around it, look.
And recently, the mass incarceration of Muslims in camps that China calls schools. All of these issues are heavily censored.
If the party controls everything, society is screwed up. The best way of celebration would be to review history and learn from it.
Even Beijing's parade was for invited guests only, with the public kept at a distance. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, was there, celebrating China's transition from impoverished neighbour to dominant power. It's an extraordinary, high-octane tribute to this country's rise to prosperity. But it's a narrative still under tight political control. I'm having to report on the parade from outside the cordon. One of a number of journalists denied access, it seems, because of official complaints about our reporting. In stark contrast to the chaos in Hong Kong, Beijing partied into the night. The gulf between the two cities and the two systems as wide as ever. Well, Fiona, this is now a city returning to normal. The roadblocks have been lifted and the tanks and missiles have gone. But there can be little doubt that the authorities will have viewed the parade as a huge success. Few nations have experienced as tumultuous a period in history as this one has over the past 7 decades. And for many, many people, the feeling of national pride will have been entirely genuine. And yet, as in all authoritarian societies, the appearance of strength can mask underlying insecurities. The parade took place along the road behind me, along the north side of Tiananmen Square, where 30 years ago hundreds of pro-democracy student demonstrators were gunned down. Today, China is a country facing another crisis of legitimacy with another young generation in Hong Kong. The big question is whether this time, once again, as it escalates, this will be a country that fails to find a political solution or any kind of resolution. Fiona.
John Sudworth in Beijing, thank you.